I gave him a gun. I gave him a badge. I gave him the training. If he didn't have the heart to go in, that's not my responsibility.
Well, that was embattled Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel just 2 weeks after the deadly shooting at Parkland High School last February, refusing to take any responsibility in the breakdown of communication and response that could have ultimately saved lives. And despite several calls for his resignation from high-ranking officials, including Governor Rick Scott, Sheriff Israel is still on the job. Now, one of Florida's biggest newspapers admits that it made a mistake and says the sheriff needs to go. The Sun-Sentinel editorial writing in part, quote, "The sheriff fails to accept responsibility for things that have gone wrong, instead suggesting that things couldn't have been better if he fails to acknowledge that mistakes were made, not only by individuals, but by his command. How can we expect a better outcome next time?" Jonathan Hunt is live in our West Coast newsroom with the story. Jonathan?
Lisa, Sheriff Scott Israel has been fighting for his job ever since the February mass shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. The biggest issue, beyond his self-praise, the witness statements that highlighted the contrast between Broward Sheriff's deputies' actions as the shooting unfolded and those of Coral Springs police officers. A state-appointed safety commission said sheriff's deputies, some of them at least, appeared to take their time putting on vests when they arrived at the school and took cover behind their vehicles rather than immediately entering the school to confront the shooter. Coral Springs police officers, according to the commission, were far more proactive. The commission found, in fact, that 8 sheriff's deputies heard gunfire but did not immediately enter the building. One of those was the school resource officer, Deputy Scott Peterson. He, of course, was seen on video appearing to hide behind a wall. He was suspended at the time pending an investigation and later resigned. In a letter to the Safety Commission Wednesday, Sheriff Israel highlighted policy changes instigated since the shooting, but again defended his department's policies at the time of the shooting, saying, quote, "It is the strong belief of this sheriff that no policies, no words would have led to Deputy Peterson going into that building." Now, the influential Sun-Sentinel newspaper, which initially defended the sheriff, is, as you mentioned, calling for his removal from office, something parents of some of those who died that February day have long demanded. Now, incoming Republican Governor Ron DeSantis, who takes office on January 8th, could suspend Sheriff Israel once the Safety Commission report is formally published. The sheriff told the Miami Herald this week he has, quote, "no plans to resign." Lisa?
Thank you, Jonathan. And joining me now is a man who has been calling for Sheriff Israel's resignation from the beginning. Jeff Bell, president of the Broward Sheriff's Office Deputies Association. Jeff, thank you for being with us, sir.
Good evening.
So I want to talk to you about the shift from the Sun-Sentinel. Why is that important?
That is huge down here in South Florida. The Sun-Sentinel has always been known as a left-leaning liberal newspaper who has defended the sheriff at all costs, almost in a romantic relationship with the sheriff's office over the past couple of years. So for them to come out and admit that they've made a mistake is huge. And if you remember back in April of this year, 85% of our membership voted that we had no confidence in Sheriff Israel, and we called for his removal. That action drew sharp criticism from the Sun-Sentinel, and they wrote a 2-page full-corner article against the union, saying that we were overreacting and trying to extort the sheriff for a better contract over the Parkland massacre, which was the furthest from the truth. Well, somebody in the last 8 months at the Sun-Sentinel finally found their courage and grew a backbone and unleashed their investigative reporters to go out and find the truth. And 8 months later, after our voted no confidence of Sheriff Scott Israel, the Sun-Sentinel, the largest supporter of Sheriff Israel, has finally reached the same conclusion that this union and the men and women of the Broward Sheriff's Office reached 8 months earlier, which is Sheriff Israel needs to be removed from the Broward Sheriff's Office immediately.
Sir, what goes through your mind when you hear that Peterson did not go in, that these other Broward deputies took their time putting on their vests and did not go in, they hid? What goes through your mind?
Well, you feel disappointed that we didn't make the right decisions that day. But outside of the law enforcement community, you can understand the anger from the community. Within our own department, we understand why failures of this level took place this day. When you have a sheriff who on November 4th, 2013, intervened himself into our active shooter policy and took out the word will respond and replaced it himself with the word may respond. It causes a disconcern with the deputies responding to the scene of what action they should take. And then when he publicly announces that we're no longer a law enforcement agency and we're now a community-based law enforcement agency and where we're going to help out the community rather than to fight crime in Broward County, we're taking the wrong approach. And then when his further implementation of lack of training and the stripping the money away from our training budget so that we spend more time in classrooms learning about politeness and policing, and we only spend 4 hours a year, believe that, 4 hours a year practicing with our guns on a gun range that we lease from the county. The nation's largest fully accredited sheriff's office, which is the Broward Sheriff's Office, does not even have their own gun range or training facility to practice for these events. And I put the full blame on Sheriff Scott Israel for his intervention into these policies and for failure to demand from the Broward County Commission a proper training facility so that we can better prepare for the next incident, which is just waiting for us around the corner.
Well, sir, what do you know about the commission report? Any key findings that viewers at home need to know about?
Well, that'll be made public on January 1st. We've made recommendations to Governor-elect Ron DeSantis that we need to take better courses of actions with our juvenile justice system here in the state of Florida. I can tell you this, on February 14th, 2018, Nicholas Cruz and Nicholas Cruz only went into that school and pulled that trigger, which cost the lives of 17 people. But I can tell you that the failed programs, such as the Promise program, and the lack of training and the policies that this sheriff has created within Broward County did not create Nicholas Cruz, but it certainly created an environment which allowed somebody like Nicholas Cruz to flourish in. And we are seeing the results of the poor policies and the Promise program taking into effect, where kids today are no longer held responsible for the actions that they take within the community.
Well, and these families certainly deserve accountability. And I think one of the issues and a frustration for so many Americans is the fact that Sheriff Israel continuously refuses to take any responsibility. And it really does start at the top, as you laid out. You know, how does it make you feel when you hear Sheriff Israel just refuse to take any responsibility for his actions or his failed leadership?
There's one word to describe the sheriff: narcissistic. This sheriff believes that nothing can be his fault, and everything that he does is purely for political gain. This man has appointed a leadership within the Broward Sheriff's Office that is incompetent at best. Their friends, political appointments, and cronies that he's brought into this agency. Perfect example, Jan Jordan, captain of Parkland on the day of the massacre. What were her qualifications? That she was a diversity pick from Sheriff Israel, or that she was competent, she was a great leader? No, she was not. And that was proven because she was overwhelmed when the very first minute of that shooting took place. That captain would have been overwhelmed with a simple traffic stop, and that was the sheriff's #1 pick to go into Parkland as the captain in that district.
Sir, do you expect incoming Governor-elect DeSantis to take action regarding Israel?
Well, I've been hoping for the past 10 months that Governor Scott would take action, but he's failed to do so. It's not an easy decision to do, but it's the right decision to do. I've made my opinions very clear to Governor-elect Ron DeSantis. He knows my opinions on the sheriff, and he knows what needs to be done to fix Broward County, not just only within the Sheriff's Department, but there's other areas that need to be fixed. So hopefully, with a report that comes out on January 1st, and then what's expected to be the FDLE report shortly after that, he'll have enough ammunition to finally pull the trigger and remove Sheriff Israel as the sheriff of Broward County and replace him with somebody who is competent enough to be the leader of the largest fully accredited sheriff's office in the nation.
Well, thank you, sir. Our hearts are still with those families who lost loved ones. Just a heartbreaking story. We appreciate you being with us.
Thank you.